Hi, everyone. Today we're going to discuss literary devices, specifically looking at character. So if you can get your notes out and follow along with me. One of the things you want to think about with characters is kind of the idea of a dynamic character, a character which may change throughout the course of a story or novel. Oftentimes, the main character is dynamic. We'll see them come up to a conflict, and on the other side, the conflict change. But there's also static characters, characters who remain primarily the same through the course of a story. This doesn't mean that they're underdeveloped characters or they're bad characters. Sometimes these characters are very steady characters, and so you see them stay the same throughout the entire novel or the entire text. That being said, they could be just a side character as well that we don't see the development as well. So static and dynamic is change or not change. It doesn't really have to do with the complexity of the character. Next, we look at kind of the complexity, right? These types of characters around character who is well developed, who demonstrates varied and sometimes contradictory traits. We think of these characters like we think of people, where they're not all good and not all bad. They're kind of these messy characters who have faults, but also have things that we love about them. Then we kind of have these flat characters, and I would argue a lot of like Disney characters or a lot of like YA fiction oftentimes has these flat characters that are kind of two-dimensional. They're not really complicated characters, and they don't really develop. They're kind of just there to push the story along, push the plot along. And then we have a very specific type of character that is a type of flat character who's called a stock character, oftentimes a stereotypical character who's like instantly recognizable, kind of like the quirky best friend or like the annoying little brother. So again, you kind of think of like the basic storylines that you may have seen in children's television growing up. Oftentimes we'll have these stock characters in them. There's also different types of characters that we discuss with different language as we kind of move forward in our literary study. So we have the protagonist, and pro means for. So it's kind of the stories for them. They're the one that's moving forward. They are the hero or the main character, the story's main character. Then we have the antagonist, kind of the opposite, perhaps the villain of the protagonist. And oftentimes in the text that we are seeing too, the antagonist may not be necessarily a person, but sometimes something in society that is like pushing against our character. Then we have secondary characters. Oftentimes these are like the sidekick, the loyal friend, the person who kind of furthers the plot, maybe a wise counsel. And then we have these special characters. They're called character foils. It's a secondary character who kind of contrasts the protagonist in order to highlight the aspects of the main character's personality. So if our main character is like super studious and very like book smart and listens to classical music and all this stuff, they might have a friend or a sibling who is like all kind of listens to like alternative music and who doesn't conform and who's really bad at school, to kind of show the differences between these characters. As we talk about characterization, characterization is this idea of, right, creating an imaginary person that may seem lifelike. And we're going to talk a little bit about these Steele's characterizations. I'm just going to click on this here so you can see it. This Steele graphic organizer talks about characterization in kind of these 5 elements, right? What characters say, they're speaking, what characters think, their thoughts, characters' effects on others, like how perhaps characters change or what their relationship looks like with other characters in the text, what their actions are, and what their looks are. And these can give us some insight to what our characters are. All right, when we think about character development, I want you to think a bit more broadly because we are kind of thinking about this complexity of thought. So we want to think about our character both like internal and external. Internal character development, like their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions. We can track these things throughout the text. We can see how their thinking may have changed, because a dynamic character oftentimes isn't physically dynamic. They may not physically change, but their thinking may change, or their feelings about something or a topic may change. Versus these external character developments where maybe they take different actions. We can see that their relationships have changed. Even sometimes their dialogue or their speech may change. I think it's important to look at both of these when you look at character development and looking at what a character looks like holistically. So, as we're thinking deeply about characters, things that you need to consider are one, expect characters, especially as we get to more complex text, to be complicated and show more than just one character trait. Also, you might want to consider as you are going through the text, we're not done with them, that you might want to revise your thinking in the face of new evidence. You might think a character is one way, but then in a new scene, you see something that you haven't seen before. Go back to your notes and revise that. Also, it's really interesting to look at a character's less likable sides. Good kind of complex texts that have characters that we love oftentimes are not perfect because we are not perfect as people, and it gives us this like human connection to them. So look at a character's less likable side, reflect on the characters in the story after you read the ending, and then consider maybe the external pressures put on characters. Also, know that some traits matter more than others because they affect the rest of the story. So sometimes a character might seem one way and you might think it's really important, but as you look at the whole story arc, you realize it's not. So hopefully these notes as we went through them are going to help you a little bit as you think about character, as you think about the characters in your text and how they relate to your reading.